All right, I'll introduce myself. Look, I'm Dharmash Mistry. I'm a partner at Lakestar. I'm an entrepreneur, CEO, turned to
Sorry,
the
I'm coming
dark
back.
side of the force about 10 years ago to be a venture capitalist. First at Benchmark Boulderton, now at Lakestar. So maybe I'll tell you a little bit about Lakestar before we kick off. Is that okay?
That would be delighted.
While you find your notes, good.
No, the
So
notes
look,
are here. The notes are
so,
here.
so Lakestar, we are a Eurocentric global fund. A lot of words. We're 10 investment professionals. We're based in London, Berlin, and Zurich, so investment professionals actually on the ground. We are focused on Europe. We do Series A plus in Europe, and with a view to take some of the best entrepreneurs and companies to the US. And then we invest today behind some of the best entrepreneurs in the US, later stage, behind NEA or Sequoia or Kleiner, with a view to bringing them back to Europe and using our network to help them launch into Europe. So it's a kind of global corridor strategy today. We invest, today we have €500 million assets under management. We're investing out of a €350 million fund. Our check sizes are roughly $3 million to $30 million today.
You answered all the questions.
So we're done. I've saved you some time now.
Okay, let's go to some anecdotes. I think as a fund, you have been associated to lots of big stories. Maybe you can share some big investment successes.
Okay, so I think the kind of the origins of the fund and the early successes, I think it's underpinned by early investments in things like Facebook, Airbnb, Skype, and more recently Spotify. We believe we're in the entrepreneur service business, so we tend not to make too much noise, and we're behind the scenes. The stars are the entrepreneurs, and our job is to help service them. I guess the big success we hope will be Spotify, which IPOs soon, and we hope will be another very big beacon for the European stroke non-US ecosystem in tech, because we believe this will be one of the first multi-billion-dollar exits coming out, which shows that large companies can be built in Israel and in Europe, which need to be taken notice of. Today, we see something like 60 or so unicorns coming out of Europe currently, and about 10 or so coming out of Israel. So we're very impressed by the ecosystem here and very proud to come and learn from some of you guys.
So maybe you can explain the Israeli entrepreneur who's in the audience about what Lakestar does. I would call it the invisible hands in the background, which make things happen. And Klaus shared with me that he did help Spotify lots with the regulatory tape, for example, in Europe. And he was the one heading that. But what do you promise entrepreneurs, especially from Israel, what you're going to bring apart from just money?
Okay, so look, take all advice with a pinch of salt and filter appropriately. But our view has always been the entrepreneur is the star, and we're in the service business. And so money today is commodity. And therefore, it's really important on two levels. One, money is connected to some added value. And B, if you've been in this game long enough, you know that the average holding time of a company is 7 to 8 years. And so you're getting involved in a marriage with people that you want to work with through up and down cycles. So therefore, you have to learn to dig in and want to work with the entrepreneur and the team to build that company to be the best. So what kinds of things do we do? So yes, we do all the normal things that one would expect around, we help with recruitment, we help with business development and connections. But I think our differentiation in Europe especially is because we are on the ground in specific geographies in Europe. We don't have just an ecosystem of relationships with entrepreneurs, but we're very close to CEO and chairmen of very large corporates and listed companies in Germany and France and in the UK especially. And out of serendipity, I'd say, more than strategic skill, what we found is when many of our companies get very big, they hit a boundary of regulation, be it in the mobility sector, be it in the healthcare sector, be it in the fintech sector. And I think, how can we work with governments and regulators as a force for good as opposed to just pushing regulation? So, we have spent time with the German government, with Merkel and crew, and Klaus has built the largest think tank in Germany around digital, so we see commissioners and ministers. We advise on industrial strategy in the UK, and we've been involved in Macron campaign. And I think our thesis is a force for good, because if you believe over the long term, the next industrial revolution is probably around AI and ML, how robots and machines will start to make decisions. You could take every single value chain of any industry, mobility, healthcare, take each of the decision points, and if robots and machines take some of those decisions, what we believe is much of the value will float to the software layer. And if it floats to the software layer, all that value today will probably go to the US or China unless you have local champions. And therefore, we think a small bit of what we, and hopefully others in the ecosystem should play, is a role as a force for good, to work with governments and regulators to help back winners and advantage winners in the ecosystem. And we now have a number of examples of how that's playing out.
That sounds all very, very sophisticated. In what segments you are spending most time? What type of industries or verticals in our new economy are the ones you want to appeal to, i.e. who should be thinking of Lakestar as a partner, depending on their segment?
So look, in terms of macro, we're pretty broad. So traditionally more consumer, but increasingly our time is spent more on enterprise in the last 3 or 4 years. We do tech very broadly, but we keep away from very heavy healthcare or clean tech, which is not our skill set. So stay where we are advantaged, mostly software, not hardware, mostly. Never say never. And then in terms of what we're finding is there's a bifurcation of where we look early versus where we're looking later. So early looks like horizontals, which are still immature, but we're learning. So blockchain as a horizontal infrastructure. We've done 2 big investments, blockchain.com, the world's largest blockchain wallet, Shapeshift, one of the largest exchanges, AI and ML leading to neural networks, all of that as a horizontal. We're looking at lots of companies. We're still learning in terms of who's going to be the winner and what kind of moat and competitive advantage you need, be it data, be it something else. So those types of horizontals. And then the next set of platforms, which and the ecosystem around them. So, if you move from mouse and keyboard towards touch screens, we think the next set of platforms are probably voice, and then a little bit further down, mixed reality, kind of things like augmented reality. And so we're looking at a lot of companies in those spaces, which could be the next platforms. And then later stage, we look very much in verticals. So be it health tech or mobility or fintech, et cetera.
Have you invested in profitable companies?
Have we invested in profitable companies? I mean, maybe some of our companies become profitable, but we're venture investors at heart, and we're backing entrepreneurs and teams trying to disrupt and reinvent industries. But I think, venture is a power law game, as you know very well, Marco. So, what we do is we have to swing for the fences with the teams, looking for teams that want to completely reinvent and destroy industries and build significant value. So it's that kind of game.
So it sounds like the team is for you the most important one.
I mean, ultimately, it's the huge difference between a private equity leverage buyout type thesis versus a venture-based thesis. For us, we are very much spending, this is a relationship for the long term. It's the CEO, it's the team, it's how we might work with them. And we don't believe in passive capital in this space. But I think it's not just the team. The other thing that many of us, if you've been an operator before, you've run companies, the other thing that many of us are really attuned to and interested in is the product and the product roadmap and how we think about the experience of the product and how we translate that into very clear, tangible benefits. Yeah. So we spend a lot of time on those kind of things.
So it's segments, and you mentioned a few, kind of blockchain, AI.
Horizontals, yeah.
And then the later stage, more like the verticals. It's the team, and then it's the product, of course. So lots of discussion we had all over the years at NOAH about
many years.
Valuation.
Marco, you're making me feel old now.
10 years. I don't know. I spoke to Eden about it. I told him 20 years experience. I thought it's a compliment and said it's sad. So I'm not mentioning that anymore. Do you still think there's a valuation gap between Europe and the US?
Yes. So really interesting, I think. So I think today, when we look at Series A, Series B, broadly, we think roughly on a median level, there's a 30 to 40% valuation difference. Yeah. But I think when you unbundle this and start to look at kind of what's happening amongst the winners, so like I said, we found 60 unicorns in Europe so far that we've noted, and we started looking at the characteristics of those winning companies versus those in the US, and we found they're much more capital efficient. And it was quite shocking to us. So
who's more capital efficient?
The Europeans. So, for
well,
example,
I guess this is unfortunately because they don't raise so much capital.
Well, does it build opportunity for bigger checks, which I think we should come to. But B, I think today, I think 1/3 of European unicorns have raised less than $100 million, and the analogy in the US is between 2% and 3%. Right? And the second thing is the hurdle to become a unicorn is much higher. So in Europe, it's like $320 million of revenue, and in the US, it's like $120 million. And so there's probably capital efficiency, there's element of maybe less bubbly.
By the way, this goes back to the valuation gap.
It goes back to the valuation gap.
Higher revenue multiples.
Yeah. So, I mean, but the European revenue multiples are like 18 to 20. The US revenue multiples are like 45. So there's a whole series of deltas which are different in the market.
2 last questions, roughly. Of the last 10 deals Lakestar did, were there more in Europe or more in the US?
Last 10, I think it's probably, our ratio remains the same. It's probably 7-3. So 70% Europe, 3 in the US.
And how important it is for you that the entrepreneur you're backing is a serial entrepreneur out of the last 10 deals, roughly?
Just doing a quick count. I think probably 3 or 4 are serial entrepreneurs.
Okay.
Yeah?
So you don't need to be a serial entrepreneur.
No, I think, and again, there's an element of sometimes super experience is valuable in terms of scaling and build companies. Sometimes the naivety of challenging the status quo when everyone else is not wanting to challenge it is also very helpful.
Well, that sounds excellent. That's why we came here also. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marco. Good to see you
Really
again. Well done.
And say hi to Klaus.
I will do.